Hello, and welcome to the training session for the Critical Languages Projects application. The Critical Language Project Grants, or CLPs, are a part of the Teachers of Critical Languages program. Both TCLP and the CLP grants are sponsored by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs of the U.S. Department of State and implemented by American Councils for International Education. We are pleased to collaborate with ECA on this project and assist in recognizing their vision and support of critical language learning. We would like to thank the State Department for their generous funding. So let's get started talking about the Critical Languages projects. Critical language projects are meant to complement and expand upon the goals of TCLP. The purpose of the CLPs is to contribute to the development of critical language programs and promote mutual understanding and lasting relationships between U.S. schools and TCLP alumni schools in China, Egypt, and Morocco. This grant will provide between $500 and $3,000 to help support projects which promote further mutual understanding of critical language teaching and learning. As you start to brainstorm project ideas, it is important to keep in mind how this project will expand and strengthen the learning and teaching of English, Mandarin, or Arabic as a foreign language in the U.S. or your home countries. This project grant is only open to current and former TCLP exchange teachers, U.S. mentor teachers, administrative representatives, and U.S. schools and districts that are part of TCLP. Alumni who have returned to their home countries are also able to propose projects between their home schools and their U.S. host school. These projects may focus on improving the teaching and learning of English as a foreign language, whereas in the U.S., these projects will most likely focus on teaching and learning of Arabic and Mandarin. There are two broad categories that projects must fall under. First, there are school projects. These are projects that benefit U.S. host schools or districts and/or participants' home schools and may be collaborative between two or more TCLP participants or alumni. The second is professional development projects. This includes funding for attending conferences or professional development opportunities that enhance curriculum development or the teaching of critical languages. Now we'll discuss them in a bit more detail. The next few slides will give you some examples of ideas that fall into the school projects category. Remember that school project does not necessarily mean that the project can only take place within the walls of your own school. However, it means that it will benefit your school. You may also collaborate with other TCLP schools in a joint classroom project, video conference, or other idea. You may speak with other TCLP alumni about sharing professional development ideas and best practices. As long as the project can be shown to benefit the school or the school district and their critical language learning and teaching, it falls into this category. Some examples of school projects might be projects that connect one classroom with another. It could be speech competitions, video conferences, inquiry-based learning, domestic school partnerships. It could include projects that share innovative teaching methods or best practices. It could include comparative lessons with fellow teachers, for example, or maybe cross-training projects among participating alumni schools or alumni, or projects that develop curricula and teaching materials. These are just some of the ideas that fall into the school project category, and we encourage you to be creative and come up with your own ideas. Of course, you can also use this project as an opportunity to do outreach with your students. It could fund a new Arabic or Mandarin language club, or enhance your existing language curriculum and teaching materials. Collaborative classroom or sister school projects with your TCLP alumni teachers in China and Egypt and Morocco are a great way to connect your students with their international peers, to share ideas with other teachers, and continue the TCLP spirit of collaboration and mutual understanding. Collaborative projects can take place between more than one TCLP in the school, TCLP school in the US, China, or Egypt, and with schools that are not TCLP alumni. However, these schools cannot be listed as official collaborators. They would just be helpful to the project. There are two pictures on this screen that are relevant to school projects. The one on the left is called Chinese New Year, and that one was a few years ago. The teacher, who was Min Hua Wei, and his principal, Molly Stewart, planned a Chinese New Year celebration at a local shopping center, and this built awareness and support in the community for their school's Mandarin program. And then on the right, round 9, was a project called Welcome Friends. And in this project, the Lakes International Language Academy cooperated with their TCLP teacher to conduct a summer camp for their Chinese students and for English students. The students from China spent 2 weeks on campus and participated in English classes, attended afternoon activities that were with the students in the school's Mandarin program. So that was an in-person exchange, partly funded by the CLP. Here's another example of a critical language project that falls under the school category. In this picture, it shows how TCLP exchange teacher Tan Li Hua collaborated with the principal of her American host school to establish a sister school partnership. Over the course of 3 months, the two schools implemented different joint classroom activities with the ultimate goal of language and cultural exchange. Li Hua's English Club and the Chinese students at Concord High School completed several major projects, including a folktales project in which students shared stories in digital form. They used live storytelling sessions and shared pictures and videos prepared by the students about folktales. They had a project called One Day in the Life, and in that project, students exchanged messages and images describing their daily lives, and then made cross-cultural comparisons. And lastly, the My Identity, Your Identity project, in which students explored and researched the elements that form their identities. At the end of the project, the two schools signed a formal sister school agreement, and they're currently exploring opportunities to create a student or teacher exchange with one another. The second category that I mentioned was called a professional development project. So this relates to professional development of critical language teachers at your school. So it could include presentations at national or regional conferences about critical language teaching or EFL teaching in K-12 schools. Maybe it could include training events organized by the International Alumni for Teachers in the alumni's home school or a larger educational community. And lastly, it could include workshops at international alumni's home schools facilitated by U.S. host school alumni or vice versa. These projects can involve attending or presenting at conferences that are geared specifically towards some aspect of critical language learning or curriculum development. If you're thinking of writing a CLP proposal for presenting at a conference, please also make sure that you check the deadlines to submit a proposal to a conference. The CLP funding is separate from conference presentation approval, but would also be contingent on you presenting at the conference. If writing this type of CLP proposal, it is important to include why it is so important that you attend the specific conference and how the knowledge and skills that you gain will provide long-term benefits to teachers and students beyond yourself. Other professional projects might include organizing training events or a workshop at your home school or in your school community. Some examples of professional development projects are shown here on the screen, including a conference on the left, which was the Northeast Conference on the Teaching of Foreign Languages in Baltimore. One of the American TCLP alum and her colleague presented a session at this conference on musical games in the Arabic classroom. They were able to attend the conference with the help of a CLP grant, which covered their registration, transportation, and food and lodging. On the right, this is an example of a project from TCLP alumna Chen Jin-yoon, who introduced the goal of her CLP to colleagues at her school. She received funding to implement a professional development program for TESOL teachers at her school. The program took place over the course of several months and allowed teachers at her home school to attend 5 training workshops, attend and present at conferences, and visit other schools in China to observe their English classes. In her final report, she shared that nearly 1,000 teachers and 5,000 students benefited from this professional development CLP. So you can see that the further the funds will go, the more likely the project will be to get funded. This slide is about project provisions, regardless of which project category you're applying for. So the project must be implemented in the United States, China, or Egypt, or now Morocco. It must focus on the teaching or learning of critical languages and or English as a foreign language. It must be between $500 and $3,000, and travel costs may be covered, such as domestic and international airline tickets, ground transportation, per diem, and hotel costs. But these aren't guaranteed, depending on how high the cost is and what percentage of the overall grant these tickets are. The sky is the limit for creative ideas, but there are a few basic parameters that we will also go over on the next slides as well. So funds may not be used to purchase office equipment or hardware such as computers, projects, or printers. If you propose purchasing classroom materials, for example, books or DVDs, the selection committee will be looking closely at the ways in which you are able to support and show that these items are necessary for your project and that they will be used as a sustainable source of continuing the project goals, even after the project has closed. Applicants themselves may not receive a salary or honorarium, and costs associated with substitute teachers cannot be funded by this grant. They would have to be cost shared by a school or provided in some other way. When we talk about the budget a little bit later on, you will notice that the costs are listed in the cost sharing column of the budget. Cost sharing is noted very favorably by the review panel. So think creatively about the cost sharing aspect of a project. Perhaps you would like to purchase hardware for your project, but as we just noted, this is not funded by the grant. So what are other ways that you or your school might be able to fund costs for these items? And the more collaboration that you have within a community, the more likely you may be able to find ways of sharing costs of your project. Please keep in mind that you may be asked by the review panel to make changes to your proposed budget before the award is finally approved. And once the award has been approved and the project carried out, a final report of the project and a final budget are due within a month of the project's completion. A project may not last longer than 8 months. While the impact of your project will hopefully last much longer, the project start and end dates must be within this 8-month timeline. This next slide is on financial provisions. We understand that it's easy to get excited and passionate about a project idea that you would like to implement in the near future, or before a school semester ends. But please note that project funds will be dispersed 2 months after the project proposal is submitted, so please plan ahead. If you need the funds before your project begins, plan your proposal submission and proposed timeline to allow time for the funds to arrive. When the project has been officially approved and you are sent the funds, you will receive 80% of the award amount when the grant is approved. And it does take a check about 2 weeks to be prepared for you. And then the remaining 20% after your project is complete and all final reports have been turned in. Applicants must maintain complete records of all costs charged to the award for a period of 3 years after the close of the grant. And if you need to, make sure that you can provide these records to American Councils or its representatives for review at any time. Any materials published with funds from the critical language projects must be included in the final report and should carry the following acknowledgement written on the screen. So if your project includes or requires any publications, these should be included in your final report with this paragraph. When you include any signs or posters, you should also state that these materials will contain a similar statement acknowledging the role of ECA and American Councils. So we mentioned final reports, which are due within 1 month of completion of the project. Award recipients must submit this final activity report to American Councils. The report will include complete project descriptions, results based on qualitative and/or quantitative measures, and lessons learned. So did the project accomplish what it was meant to do? You would include a project impact section and attachments of any materials that were created for the project. A final budget with a breakdown of all actual costs in comparison to those proposed is also the responsibility of the applicant. You must keep track of this and all itemized receipts and keep them in a file. You'll want to include a complete description of the project and lessons learned. We'll discuss this more on the next slide. So the final report will include all of the items that are done through the last months of the project. And the due date for the final project report in this example, you can see, is due 1 month after the project takes place. So this person submitted on November 30th. They were approved on December 30th. Then on January 7th, 80% of their funds were dispersed. They got those funds probably about 2 weeks after January 7th. Then their project takes place February 7th through May 1st. And then their report was due on June 1st. 2 weeks later, they were able to get their funds. So you can see the full timeline and full length of time that a project could take. And you can see that this project is shorter than 8 months, but you do have 8 months for a project if needed. So now that you have project ideas and you've thought about what you're going to put in it, how exactly do you apply for a grant? So you can go to the TCLP website and apply for this grant online. There is a rolling deadline for these applications, so they can be sent to us at any time. Just remember to plan in enough time to hear back from the review committee whether you've been approved or not before you'll need the funds. So you'll go to the TCLP website at tclprogram.org and you'll look at the Alumni Resources tab. You'll click there and then you will be directed to a page that has the application. When you apply, keep in mind that CLP grants are awarded competitively, meaning that funding will only be given to grant proposals that have been well thought out and thoroughly researched. Keep in mind that the review panel is really looking to see how well you've thought through your entire project, including all of the details that are necessary to implement it and follow up after it's over. The more thoroughly you research the details of your project proposal and explain them in a clear way, the better chance you have of the review committee understanding what you have in mind. So remember that the review committee doesn't know you, even though you're alumni, and doesn't necessarily know what you mean unless you clearly explain what your project is. So once you click on that Alumni Resources tab, you'll be taken to the Critical Languages Project application. You'll click Start, and then you will be directed to actually filling out the application. Keep in mind that once you have started your application, it will move below to My Forms. So the next time that you log in, you will look for your application under My Forms and continue where you left off. So once you've clicked in, this is what you'll see. It describes the different sections that you'll need to fill out for your application. And your application must include all of the sections listed in order for you to be able to submit it. I know that all of you are wonderful educators, writers, and creative thinkers. However, most of us are not trained to be grant writers. So this is partially the purpose of this training session and why the application asks for detailed information. We understand that you are busy teaching, administering, and generally taking care of a million things at once. Therefore, we hope to be as clear as possible in relating to you the information that the review panel likes to see when they're looking at an application proposal. In turn, this will help you to start making your proposal a reality. So this is the first page that you'll see when you click into starting the application. You fill out your information and any collaborators that you're working with, the amount of money that you're asking for, the type of grant that this is, and then a project abstract will be on the next page. So fill this out section by section, and you'll note that items that are required are marked with a red asterisk. And all of those required items must be completed in order for the application to be submitted and to actually go through to the American Council's TCLP team and to the selection committee. On this page, you see the project abstract at the bottom, and this is a one-paragraph summary of your proposed project. It's very important to be very clear and ensure that the selection committee can understand what your project is about in brief. This is also what will be put on the TCLP website to introduce your project. So now we'll go into the different needs that you need to put into your proposal. The first is the statement of need. This is the issue, the problem, or just general need that you will address with the implementation of your project. You'll talk about how the project will impact and benefit your school, your community, and/or you. Describe similar projects to your own and think about how your project is different than those and how it will bring a different perspective. Next, you'll do the project goals and objectives. The project goal is the overall purpose of the program activities. For example, the goal of the project-based learning workshop is to establish a strong pedagogical base for EFL teachers at my home school in China. Then, you will include objectives. Objectives are the intended target outcomes of a project and measurable. For example, 5 teachers from my school and 20 more teachers from area schools will participate in the workshop and apply these theories in their classrooms, culminating in a final project showcase event attended by 200 school members. So estimate the numbers if you need to, or estimate based on what you know when you're doing these objectives, but make them as clear and concrete as possible. Then you'll put the targeted beneficiaries, both direct and indirect. For example, 20 teachers will directly benefit from this project, and 300 students will indirectly benefit from the teacher training project in Egypt. So 20 teachers will attend, and their students, 300 students, will therefore benefit from the teachers being trained. The next is project activities. This is incredibly important to be very clear so that the selection committee understands what you'll be doing. So what will you do? When will you do it? And how long will the activity take to implement? Will it be days or months? How long will it take? And make sure that it fits in those 8 months. Then, how will you plan to implement the activity? If you're implementing a workshop, you should include a workshop agenda as a supporting material, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. Next, you'll put collaborator roles. So this includes who will be working on the project and what exactly they'll be doing to make sure that everybody knows their place in the project and the project can be completed on time and with good cooperation. Next, you'll talk about monitoring and evaluation. How will you prove that your project did what it was supposed to do? How will you show what went well, what lessons you've learned, and how you could do better in the future? Next, you'll talk about sustainability. So, will this project continue after the project that the grant is paying for ends? So, for example, if you're doing a 1-month celebration in your school, what will be the lasting impact of that celebration? Whether it raises money for the language program, or starts a language club, or maybe it encourages other students at that school to participate in language classes or clubs in the future. So what is the lasting impact of your project? Next, the timeline. This should include details of when you will implement the project activities and also who the responsible parties are. The application includes a sample timeline for you to use as a guide. So here's an example of a project timeline where you can see that it says the start and end dates, the activity itself, the responsible parties, and also talks about the vendor or venues. So this shows where things will take place. And this is an actual example from a previous grant. So this helps you to clearly show the review panel, the dates, activities, responsible parties, and locations, and lets the review panel know how much time they have to approve it too. It shows the due dates for publishing info or ads and the final reporting writing. Who is responsible for that? The final part of the proposal is the budget. This should include all the costs that are necessary to carry out each step and each activity in your project. So when you're writing this, you should really look at the activities that you wrote out and make sure that they match and are clear. The budget narrative should also spell out how you arrived at each estimated itemized cost and include prices and unit totals. We understand that your final budget may reflect some changes to the budget after materials are actually purchased. So just estimate. That's what the review panel is looking for. Make sure that you've done any research that's necessary to determine the amount of money that you're requesting in the proposal. When the review panel looks at your budget, they'll ask themselves, can the project be accomplished with this budget? Are costs reasonable for current prices? Does the budget match proposed activities? And is there sufficient budget detail and explanation? The application will include a sample budget and a sample budget narrative for you to use as a guide. So let's look at that next. Here is a sample budget. And you can see that everything is clearly labeled and filled in. In your project budget, make sure to separate any administrative costs such as salary, room rental, equipment rental, communication charges, etc., from the direct program costs or direct activity costs as shown here. If you're making purchases in your country, your costs will not be in US dollars. So we ask that you please include a copy of a currency conversion rate that you're using to arrive at your final numbers in US dollars, because the budget must be in US dollars for it to be approved. You can include both amounts, the international currency and the US currency, in the itemized budget if needed. Each section of the budget, both administrative and activity costs, must be broken down and itemized. So while we're looking at this slide, also remember that there are certain costs which cannot be covered by the grant, such as teacher salaries and costs for substitute teachers. You'll notice that the substitute teachers are included in administrative costs, up here at the top in column G. Please note that while cost sharing is not required, it is highly recommended. Cost share includes any other organization or individuals contributing to the project. It could include donations of supplies or workspace, for example. Along with the budget, please include a separate budget narrative. So here's an example of budget narrative, and you can see how everything is explained in much more detail. So please be very specific and describe what and why each item is being purchased and paid for. You'll include unit numbers and unit costs that show how you arrived at your total costs. You'll want to make sure that the budget narrative directly relates to your budget. So everything in your budget should be included in the budget narrative. And if it's not in one, it shouldn't be in the other. They should match exactly in terms of categories and what's explained, as well as the total project cost, cost sharing, and grant funds requested. After that, you don't want to forget your supporting documents. This includes resumes, support letters, and agendas for training. So a support letter would be something from your school, for example, saying that they're going to be collaborating with you and that you have space available in the school for your project. It could also be a letter from anyone who is offering cost share. It could be from your school if they're covering substitute teachers. Anything where you require support from somewhere else and need to prove it, provide a letter to prove that you have that support. The resumes would be just for people who are collaborating with you or doing presentations. And then agendas for trainings would be any workshops or trainings or events that you're doing. You would want to include an agenda to show what you'll be doing. And that should also match the activities that you've listed and the budget that you've included in your application. Everything should match so that the review committee is not confused and so that they understand exactly what you're going to do. So the final part of the CLP application is reviewing and clicking submit. Remember to include the support documents before you do this, and feel free to contact TCLP with any questions or concerns. So our email and our phone number are listed on the screen, as well as the link so that you can go to ace.americancouncils.org/TCLP grants. If you go there directly, then you will be directly sent to the TCLP application. The CLP application. So that is all for today. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you the best of luck with your critical language project application.